I sat at the head of the table wearing my sister's pearl earrings while her husband, Edward Ashford, smiled at me from across the 12-seat mahogany monstrosity, his hand casually resting on the thigh of the woman he'd brought into our home. His mistress, Evelyn Park. She was beautiful. I'd give her that, all sharp cheekbones and designer clothes paid for with my sister's suffering. "Darling," Edward said, his voice dripping with the condescension I'd grown to despise over the past 3 weeks. "I hope you don't mind. Evelyn will be staying with us for a while. She's a close business associate." Evelyn smirked at me, her red lips curling like she'd already won. Poor thing. She had no idea she was sitting across from the woman who'd buried 3 men in the Nevada desert last spring and smiled while doing it. I reached for my wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid slowly. "Of course, Edward. Any associate of yours is welcome in our home." My smile was serene. Patient. The smile of a predator who knew exactly when to strike. Because Edward Ashford had made one fatal mistake. He thought he was still married to a broken woman. A fragile heiress with a history of mental illness and a spine made of paper. He had no idea that the woman sitting before him wasn't Margaret Ashford at all. "I am Anastasia Whitmore, former recluse. Current head of the Obsidian Syndicate, the most powerful underground financial network on the eastern seaboard. And I didn't come here to play house. I came here to destroy him." Hey beautiful souls. Welcome back to our channel. If you're new here, you're about to witness one of the most satisfying revenge stories we've ever told. So if you enjoy stories about powerful women taking back what's theirs, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Now let's dive into Anastasia's story. The mountains were beautiful in October. I stood on the wraparound porch of my private cabin, watching the Blue Ridge Range turn shades of amber and rust as the season shifted. A mug of black coffee warmed my hands. The air smelled like pine and cold earth and the particular kind of silence that only existed far away from the rest of the world. I had been here for 2 years. Not by force. Not by anyone's design but my own. After my father's empire crumbled, after the investigations, the betrayals, the years of fighting battles that were never mine to fight, I had walked away. Quietly. Completely. I had handed the Obsidian Syndicate to Vincent and told him to keep the lights on until I decided what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. Then I had driven to the Virginia mountains and disappeared. The retreat wasn't a facility. It was a collection of private cabins on 500 acres of wilderness, the kind of place where wealthy people came to think without being interrupted. No social media. Limited phone access. Absolute discretion guaranteed. I had come here to breathe. But breathing, it turned out, was only possible for so long before the rest of the world caught up with you. My phone, the private line that only 6 people in the world had access to, buzzed on the porch railing. I looked at the screen. "Vincent. You never call unless something is wrong," I said by way of greeting. "Good morning to you too." His voice was careful. Measured. The voice of a man choosing his words. "How are the mountains?" "Vincent." A pause. "I need you to look at something." "I'm sending it now." My phone buzzed again. A series of photographs downloaded slowly over the weak mountain signal. I waited, watching the progress bar, sipping my coffee. The first image loaded. My twin sister Margaret at a society gala, wearing a stunning cobalt blue gown. She looked beautiful, she always did. But something about her expression stopped me cold. Her eyes were empty. Not sad. Not tired. Empty. Like someone had gone in and quietly switched off the lights. I scrolled to the next photograph. Margaret leaving a building, walking slightly behind a tall man whose hand was wrapped around her wrist, not her hand, her wrist, in a grip that looked possessive rather than affectionate. The man was Edward Ashford, her husband of 4 years. I'd met Edward exactly once at their wedding. He'd been charming, attentive, and completely opaque, the kind of man who showed you exactly what he wanted you to see and nothing else. I hadn't liked him then. Looking at these photographs, I understood why. I scrolled further. Margaret alone at a restaurant, pushing food around her plate. Margaret at a charity event standing slightly apart from the crowd, her smile fixed and mechanical. Margaret in the back of a car, staring out the window at nothing. She looked like a woman who had forgotten who she was. How long? I asked. Jennifer Walsh contacted me 4 months ago, Vincent said. She's been watching it happen gradually. The isolation started about a year into the marriage. Edward began managing Margaret's schedule, her social engagements, her finances. Friends who visited too often found themselves quietly uninvited from events. Her assistant was replaced with someone who reports to Edward. Jennifer Walsh, Margaret's college roommate. One of the fiercest, most loyal people I'd ever met. If Jennifer was worried enough to reach out to Vincent, then this was serious. She's being controlled, I said flatly. Systematically. He's constructed a very elegant cage. Vincent's voice was tight with restrained anger. She still appears at public events. Still smiles for photographs. But the woman in those images is not the Margaret we know. I looked at the last photograph again, at my sister's hollow eyes, and felt something shift inside me. Something that had been dormant for 2 years, buried under mountain air and deliberate stillness. There's more, Vincent said. I had our people look into Edward Ashford's history. Quietly. And? He's done this before. 2 previous long-term partners, both from wealthy families. Both became increasingly withdrawn during their relationships with him. Both relationships ended badly. One woman relocated abroad under circumstances that were never fully explained. The other disappeared from public life entirely and has not been seen in 3 years. Financial motivation? Almost certainly. Both women had significant assets. In both cases, Edward emerged from the relationships considerably wealthier than he entered them. The methods were always clean. Always legal on the surface. Contracts, joint accounts, investment agreements signed during periods when the women were apparently not thinking clearly. He isolates them, disorients them, and then gets them to sign away their assets. That is our assessment, yes. I set down my coffee mug. My hands were perfectly steady. My mind was already moving, calculating, mapping, building the architecture of something that hadn't existed 30 seconds ago. What about the Ashford Group? I asked. Publicly traded. Edward holds 31% of shares. The board is largely composed of people he installed himself. The company is profitable, but there are irregularities in the financials that a skilled eye would find very interesting. How interesting? Interesting enough that the SEC might want to take a closer look if someone were to point them in the right direction. I was quiet for a moment, watching a hawk circle lazily over the amber tree-line. What does Margaret have? I asked. Assets-wise. Your father's legitimate business holdings were split evenly between you after his death. Since you were declared legally dead 5 years ago, Margaret inherited your portion as well. She controls voting shares in Whitmore Industries worth approximately $2 billion. She has never actively managed them. They sit in trust, overseen by a board that follows her instructions. And if something happened to Margaret while she was married to Edward? A long pause. He would inherit her estate, including the Whitmore shares. There it was. The shape of the whole thing, clear as mountain water. Edward Ashford hadn't fallen in love with my sister. He had identified her as an acquisition target, moved with precision and patience, and was now in the process of stripping away everything that made her herself until nothing remained but a signature on a document. I picked up my coffee mug, took one final sip, and set it down. Pack my things, I said. I'm coming home. Days later, Vincent's brownstone, Upper East Side, Manhattan. The briefing took 4 hours. We sat in Vincent's study surrounded by the tools of intelligence, maps, financial documents, organizational charts, surveillance photographs, and enough information to make a federal prosecutor's career. He walked me through everything methodically, the way he always did, the way my father had taught both of us. I listened without interrupting. I'd learned long ago that the most dangerous thing you could do in the middle of gathering intelligence was let your emotions speak before your mind finished thinking. The Ashford Group's financials, Vincent said, sliding a thick folder across the table. Our forensic accountant has been through every public filing for the past 4 years. There are discrepancies between the reported figures and what the actual numbers suggest. Shell companies, offshore accounts with unclear purposes, vendor contracts that don't match market rates. Insider trading? Likely. But it's layered carefully. It would take time to unravel. He paused. Unless someone with deep resources and motivation chose to accelerate the process. Consider it accelerated. I flipped through the folder, my eyes moving quickly across columns of numbers. Who does he owe? Every powerful man has someone he owes. Several board members have been uncomfortable with his leadership for years, but lack the sheer concentration to challenge him. There's one in particular, Raymond Holloway, early 60s, old money, has been on the Ashford Group board since Edward's father ran the company. He's watched Edward dismantle everything his father built and replace it with something shinier and considerably less honest. He'd be receptive to an alternative? I believe so. Good. Set up a meeting. I closed the folder. What about media? Vincent allowed himself a small smile. A journalist named James Wheeler. Used to be at the Wall Street Journal before Edward's people orchestrated his dismissal 3 years ago for getting too close to certain financial irregularities. He has been independently investigating the Ashford Group ever since. He has significant documentation, but lacks the resources to pursue it to publication. We provide the resources. He would need assurances. He's cautious. He's been burned before. He'll get assurances. I looked up from the documents. Now tell me about Margaret. What does she actually know about her situation? Vincent's expression shifted. More than Edward realizes. She reached out to Jennifer Walsh 6 weeks ago, found a way to communicate privately that Edward hadn't anticipated. She's aware that her situation is controlled. She's aware that Edward's interest in her is not personal. And he paused. Vincent. She asked Jennifer if you were still alive. The room went quiet. I'd been declared legally dead to protect the syndicate from the enemies who would have used my absence to destroy us. Margaret had been told only that I was unreachable, that I was safe, that she should live her life and not ask questions. She had always been too smart for that. She knows, I said. It wasn't a question. She's always known. A twin knows. Vincent reached into a drawer and produced a sealed envelope. She left this with Jennifer 2 weeks ago, with instructions to give it to me if I ever made contact. I stared at the envelope. My name was written on the front in Margaret's handwriting, not Margaret Ashford's careful, society wife script, but our handwriting. The way we'd written since childhood, looping and a little reckless. I opened it. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. I unfolded it. Anna, I know you're out there. I've always known. I need you to do something for me. Something only you can do. I need you to be me for a while. I've been documenting everything. Every financial decision Edward has made in my name. Every contract. Every account transfer. Every conversation I could record without him knowing. It's all in the Blue Harbor safety deposit box. You know the code. I'm not the woman I was, Anna. He's made sure of that. But I remember enough to know that you, the real you, the one nobody sees coming, could walk into my life and take it apart in ways I never could. Come get me out. Then burn it all down. Love, M. P.S. He's bringing Evelyn to the house next month. I thought you should know. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in my jacket pocket. She documented everything, I said. Then we have our evidence. And she wants me to take her place. I looked at Vincent steadily. You know what that means. It means you'd be walking into a controlled environment as an imposter, with a man who knows your sister better than almost anyone. He knows the version of Margaret he created. The quiet one. The compliant one. He doesn't know the Margaret who grew up with me. I allowed myself a slight smile. And he has absolutely no idea who I am. Vincent studied me for a long moment. We need to extract Margaret first. Safely, quietly, without Edward knowing she's gone. He's at a board meeting in Chicago next Thursday. Overnight trip. Our people can be in position by Wednesday evening. Then that's our window. I stood, straightening my jacket. I also need everything you have on Evelyn Park. If she's as sharp as you say, she'll be the first to notice something is off. I need to understand exactly how her mind works. Vincent pulled up another file. Evelyn Park, CFO of the Ashford Group. She and Edward have been involved for approximately 2 years, though they've been disciplined about keeping it from public view. She's not simply his mistress, she's his strategic partner. The financial architecture of the Ashford Group's irregularities has her fingerprints all over it. She's brilliant, ruthless, and entirely without sentiment. Ambitious. Extraordinarily. She wants what Edward has. We believe the long-term plan is for Margaret's assets to transfer to Edward and then for Evelyn to position herself as the power behind the throne. So she's not just complicit in what he's doing to Margaret. She helped design it. That is our assessment. I nodded slowly. Then she gets everything he gets. Anastasia. Vincent's voice held a note of caution. Once you walk into that house, there is no clean exit. This has to be played completely or not at all. I know. And you're certain? You've been away for 2 years. You built a quiet life. I built a hiding place, I said. There's a difference. I looked at him directly. My sister wrote me a letter asking me to save her. There is nothing in this world that changes my answer to that. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, and I saw the shift in his eyes from concerned friend to loyal lieutenant. Then let's begin, he said. The following Thursday, Ashford Estate, Greenwich, Connecticut. The estate was the architectural equivalent of Edward Ashford himself, impeccably beautiful and completely cold. Federal-style architecture, pristine white columns, grounds that looked like they'd been measured with a ruler. The kind of house that appeared in design magazines and felt like a stage set in person. Everything in its correct place. Nothing alive. I arrived in the early evening, 30 minutes after Edward's car had left for the airport. I came in through the East Garden entrance, guided by 2 of Vincent's people who had been positioned on the estate grounds for the past 48 hours under the cover of a landscaping service. The inside of the house was worse than the outside. Every room looked curated rather than lived in. Artwork chosen for investment value rather than beauty. Furniture arranged for aesthetics rather than comfort. It was an exhibition of wealth that contained not a single personal object, not one photograph, not one impulsive purchase, not one thing chosen simply because someone loved it. My sister had been living in a showroom. I moved quickly through the ground floor and up the main staircase to the private wing. The housekeeper, a quiet woman named Dolores, who had been with the property since Edward's father owned it and who, according to Vincent, was absolutely loyal to Margaret, met me at the top of the stairs. She took one look at me and her hand flew to her mouth. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "You're real. Miss Margaret said you were real, but I wasn't sure I believed." "Is she ready?" I asked gently. Dolores collected herself, nodding. "She's been ready since yesterday. Had me help her pack a small bag. Said to travel light." She led me down the hallway to a sitting room adjacent to the main bedroom. And there was my sister. Margaret sat in a window seat overlooking the gardens, her legs tucked beneath her, wearing a simple camel-colored wrap dress. She was thinner than I remembered, and there was a careful stillness about her that hadn't been there before, the stillness of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. But when she looked up and saw me, something happened to her face. It cracked open. Not with grief. With relief. The particular, overwhelming relief of someone who has been holding their breath for a very long time and has finally been allowed to exhale. "Anna." Her voice was barely a whisper. I crossed the room and gathered her into my arms, and she held on with both hands, her fingers clutching the back of my jacket like she was afraid I might dissolve. "I've got you," I said into her hair. "I'm here. It's done. You came." She laughed slightly, a watery sound. "I knew you would. I told Dolores you would, and she thought I was dreaming. When have I ever let you down? Never." She pulled back to look at my face, really look, the way only a twin can, cataloging every detail, finding all the things that had changed and all the things that hadn't. "You look different. Older. Stronger." She reached up and touched my cheek briefly. "Are you ready for this? He's not stupid, Anna. He's going to look for cracks. Let him look." I studied her face in return, memorizing the way she held her mouth now, the way her posture had changed, the precise measurements of a life lived under surveillance. "Tell me everything he doesn't know you know." She told me. For the next 2 hours, sitting in that cold, beautiful house, my sister debriefed me on every detail of Edward Ashford's life that she had quietly, patiently assembled over 4 years of careful observation. His habits, his fears, the things that made him flinch, the particular vanities he couldn't control, the people he needed and the people he merely used. She was extraordinary. Even diminished, even worn down by years of careful control, my sister had been watching and recording and thinking. He'd tried to make her passive and instead she'd made herself invisible enough to see everything. The Blue Harbor box, she said finally. Everything is there. Financial records, copies of documents he had me sign, correspondence between him and Evelyn, investment trail going back 3 years. I'll have Vincent retrieve it tomorrow. And Evelyn, Margaret's expression tightened. She's the sharper of the two. Edward is arrogant. Arrogance creates blind spots. But Evelyn is careful. She watches everything. I know. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise I'll be effective, I said. That's better. Margaret laughed, a real laugh this time, brief but genuine, and for a moment I could see her. The real her. Still there, still intact beneath everything Edward had layered over her. We made the exchange as the sun went down. Margaret's small bag went into Vincent's car along with Margaret herself, wrapped in a nondescript coat with her dark hair covered. She was being taken to a private property in upstate New York, a house, not an institution, comfortable and staffed with people she could trust. She would rest, recover, reconnect with Jennifer and the few friends Edward hadn't managed to fully push away. I stood at the window and watched the car disappear down the long driveway. Then I turned back to the house. My house for now. I walked to the main bedroom and stood in front of the full-length mirror. Long dark wavy hair, deep brown skin, high cheekbones, full lips, a face identical to the one that had just left in a black car. Margaret Ashford looked back at me from the mirror. I let her settle over me like a second skin. Then I went to find Dolores and asked her what time Edward usually expected dinner when he returned from travel. 2 weeks later, Manhattan. Living as Margaret Ashford required the particular discipline of someone playing chess, while everyone around them thought they were playing checkers. Edward returned from Chicago and found a wife who was, in every visible way, exactly as he had left her. Quiet. Accommodating. Present at meals, absent from his business conversations, decorative at social engagements. I gave him nothing to question in the first week. In the second week, I began to move. Small things at first. Asking Dolores for household accounts that Edward had previously routed directly to his own office. Requesting the contact information for Margaret's personal financial advisor, a man who had been conveniently redirecting his correspondence to Edward's assistant for the past year. Making a phone call to Jennifer Walsh that, if Edward's people were monitoring communications, would appear completely innocuous. He's watching you differently, Dolores told me quietly one evening, pretending to adjust flowers in the hallway while I passed. Has been since Tuesday. Something shifted. Good, I said, equally quiet. Let him watch. The dinner conversations were my favorite arena. Edward was skilled at misdirection, at steering conversations away from anything that might invite scrutiny, wrapping his evasions in warmth and reasonable-sounding explanations. I could see the architecture of it now that I was looking directly at it rather than being inside it. He was very good. If I had actually been the woman he thought I was, I probably wouldn't have noticed at all. But I was Anastasia Whitmore. I had grown up watching my father operate in rooms where everyone was lying and the only skill that mattered was knowing which lies served you. You've been on the phone a great deal this week, Edward mentioned one evening, his tone casual and his eyes anything but. Have I? I looked up from my dinner with a mild expression. With Jennifer Walsh. She's my closest friend. I've been neglecting her. I took a sip of water. Actually, she mentioned she might visit next month. I told her I'd love that. A brief pause. Of course. Though next month is quite busy for us. I know. But I've been turning down too many things lately. I think it would be good for me to reconnect. I smiled pleasantly. You're always saying you want me to be more engaged with social life. He smiled back. Absolutely. The smile didn't touch his eyes. I made a mental note and moved on to the next course. 3 weeks in. The night Evelyn Park arrived at the house, I was in the study reviewing the documents Vincent had retrieved from the Blue Harbor safety deposit box. The material Margaret had assembled was remarkable. For years of careful, quiet documentation, financial records showing accounts that had been opened in Margaret's name without her meaningful understanding of their implications. Investment agreements that had steadily moved assets into structures Edward controlled, correspondence between Edward and Evelyn that mapped the entire strategy from its beginning. Evelyn had been the architect, Edward the executor. Together they had built something impressively methodical, a financial dismantling disguised as a marriage. Reading it, I felt two things simultaneously: cold fury on behalf of my sister and cool satisfaction that every piece of what I needed was right here. I heard the front door and tucked the documents away. Evelyn moved through the house like she owned it, which, I supposed, was the point. She was dressed impeccably as always, her sharp features composed into something that almost resembled friendliness when she greeted me in the hallway. "Margaret, you look well." "Thank you." I studied her with the same careful attention she was directing at me. "Edward didn't mention you'd be joining us tonight." "Spontaneous." She smiled. "I hope it isn't an imposition." "Of course not." She was watching me the way a scientist watched an experiment, looking for the expected result and noting when it didn't appear. I gave her my most serene smile and went to ask Dolores to set an extra place for dinner. Over the following 2 weeks, Evelyn became the variable I paid most careful attention to. She was, as Vincent and Margaret had both warned, significantly sharper than Edward. She asked questions that seemed social but carried precise edges. She watched my hands when I spoke, my eyes when I listened. She tested the boundaries of what the old Margaret would accept without complaint and noted carefully when those boundaries had shifted. One evening, she came to find me in the study. "You've changed," she said, standing in the doorway. "People do," I replied without looking up from the book I was reading. "Not like this. Not this quickly." She stepped inside. "3 months ago, you were barely leaving the bedroom. Now you're reviewing household accounts, having lunches with friends, pushing back on Edward at dinner." She tilted her head. "What happened?" "I decided to be more present in my own life." I looked up and met her eyes. "Is that a problem, Evelyn?" "Not at all." She smiled. "I find it fascinating, actually." "How nice for you." She left. But her eyes, as she went, had the quality of someone solving a puzzle, and I sensed she was closer to the answer than I would have liked. I messaged Vincent that night. Accelerate the timeline. 5 weeks later, Metropolitan Auction House, Midtown Manhattan. The Metropolitan Auction House was hosting its annual charity event, the kind of glittering evening where serious money changed hands for worthy causes and serious reputations were built and dismantled over canapes. More importantly, it was where Edward intended to publicly announce the Ashford Group's international expansion, a major deal that had been in negotiation for months and that he expected to cement his standing as one of the most significant financial figures in the country. He had spent 4 years building toward this moment. I had spent 5 weeks dismantling the foundation beneath it. I arrived on Edward's arm wearing a floor-length ivory gown with clean architectural lines, my dark hair swept into a sophisticated updo, a simple diamond necklace at my throat. I looked exactly like the perfect society wife. I felt like a lit match. The Obsidian Syndicate had been quietly accumulating Ashford Group shares for 6 weeks through a network of shell entities, distributed purchases that had attracted no attention individually but now amounted to 38% of outstanding shares. Combined with the board members we had approached, Raymond Holloway and 2 others who had long been unhappy with Edward's leadership, we had enough influence to force a board meeting and demand answers. James Wheeler's investigative piece had been finalized. His editors had reviewed every document, every piece of evidence, and had signed off. It was ready to publish on command. The SEC package, compiled from Margaret's documentation and supplemented by our own forensic accounting, had been submitted that morning to a contact within the agency who would ensure it received immediate attention. Everything was in position. The auction proceeded gracefully for the first hour. Beautiful objects were sold for significant sums. Edward moved through the room with the ease of someone who had never entertained the possibility that a room might not receive him well. Evelyn, seated 2 tables away at his careful arrangement, watched me with her scientist's eyes. I watched Raymond Holloway check his phone at 8:47 p.m. and go very still. That would be the board notification. I watched 3 other guests check their phones in quick succession, their expressions shifting. The news alerts were hitting. Edward noticed the ripple. He frowned slightly, reaching for his own phone. I stood up. "I apologize for the interruption," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the ambient noise of the room. "But there's something I believe everyone here deserves to know." The room quieted. Edward's hand closed around my wrist under the table, a quick, practiced movement. I removed my arm from his grip without drama and took 1 step away from the table. "My husband has been conducting a personal relationship with his CFO, Evelyn Park, for approximately 2 years. I said it conversationally, the way you might mention the weather. This is perhaps a personal matter. But the financial arrangements that relationship has produced are not personal. They affect shareholders, board members, and business partners in this room." The silence was absolute. This evening, documentation of those financial arrangements was submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Every person in this room who holds Ashford Group shares or partnerships may wish to speak with their legal counsel before the markets open tomorrow. Edward rose from his seat, his composure fracturing at the edges. "My wife is confused. She's been under considerable stress. The documentation includes correspondence," I continued pleasantly, "in which the current strategy regarding the Ashford Group's finances is discussed in considerable detail. The authors of that correspondence are in this room." I looked between Edward and Evelyn with perfect calm. "I thought you should all know. Again, I apologize for interrupting such a lovely evening." I picked up my evening bag and walked toward the exit. Behind me, the room collapsed into urgent conversation. I heard Edward's voice rise and then recover. I heard Evelyn's chair scrape back. I heard Raymond Holloway's measured voice beginning to speak to the people around him. I did not look back. Vincent was waiting outside with a car. "How did it land?" I asked as the door closed behind me. "James Wheeler's piece went live 4 minutes ago," he said. "It's already being shared across financial media. The Ashford Group's after-hours price is in free fall." He paused. "And Raymond Holloway just sent a message requesting an urgent board meeting. Schedule it for Monday. The following 3 weeks." The destruction of Edward Ashford's professional world was efficient and, I will admit, deeply satisfying. The SEC investigation launched within 48 hours of the auction. Trading in Ashford Group shares was suspended for a week while regulators examined the filings. When trading resumed, the stock had lost 60% of its value. 3 board members resigned in the first week. The institutional investors who had anchored the company's credibility issued statements distancing themselves from current leadership. The international expansion deal Edward had planned to announce at the auction was quietly withdrawn by the other party. The Monday board meeting lasted 4 hours. Raymond Holloway presented the evidence with the careful precision of a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment for years. The vote of no confidence in Edward's leadership passed with a majority that left no room for interpretation. Edward Ashford was removed as CEO of the Ashford Group by his own board. Our share position, 38% and growing as distressed sellers looked for exits, made the Whitmore family the single largest shareholder in the company. Raymond Holloway called me personally to discuss what came next. I took the call in Vincent's study, sitting in the same chair where I'd begun planning all of this 3 months earlier. "Mrs. Ashford," he began. "Miss Whitmore," I corrected quietly. A beat of silence. Then, "I see. I suspect you see quite a lot, Mr. Holloway. That's why I'd like to meet with you." We met the following day at his office. He was a compact man in his early 60s with silver hair and the kind of steady, measured manner that came from decades of navigating genuinely complicated situations. He looked at me with the eyes of someone recalculating a great many things. "You're Victor Whitmore's daughter," he said. "Not an accusation. An orientation." "Yes. I knew your father. He was complicated. He was. I've tried to learn from the complicated parts and discard the rest." Raymond was quiet for a moment, looking at the view of the city from his office window. The Ashford Group, before Edward got his hands on it, was a sound institution. His father built something genuinely good. I've watched the last 6 years with considerable frustration. I know. That's why I'm here. I leaned forward. I want to rebuild it. Not for personal profit, I have enough of that. Because it employs 4,000 people and it should be run properly. And your involvement would be interim CEO, with a committee including yourself and 2 independent directors. 18 months to stabilize, clean up, and install permanent leadership I'm satisfied with. Then I stepped back. Raymond studied me carefully. You would step back. I'm not interested in running a financial services firm, Mr. Holloway. I'm interested in ensuring that the 4,000 people who work there still have jobs in 2 years, and that whatever Edward and Evelyn built inside that company is completely dismantled. He nodded slowly. I'll support it. Thank you. I stood. One more thing. Evelyn Park's employment is terminated effective today. I'll handle the communication. A faint smile crossed Raymond's face. With pleasure, he said. 1 week later, Ashford Residence, Manhattan. Edward had been served with divorce papers 4 days prior. He had retained lawyers. He had made statements to the press about being the victim of a coordinated attack by business rivals. He had called 3 times from different numbers, each call going unanswered. On the 5th day, he came to the house. I was in the dining room when I heard the front door. Dolores appeared at the doorway a moment later, her expression composed but cautious. Mr. Ashford, she said simply. It's all right, Dolores. I looked up from the documents I'd been reviewing. Send him in. Edward appeared in the doorway of the dining room looking like a man who had not slept properly in a week. His suit was immaculate, he was too disciplined to let that slip, but the edges of him were fraying. His jaw was tight, his eyes shadowed. He was still handsome. I noted it with complete detachment, the way you noted objective facts. Sharp jawline, clear skin, the kind of structural bone structure that photographed beautifully. None of it helped him now. He looked at me across the dining room and something shifted in his expression, something I hadn't seen from him before. Uncertainty. You're not her, he said. Quietly. With the flatness of someone stating a conclusion they'd been reluctant to reach. I set down my pen. Sit down, Edward. You're not Margaret. He stepped further into the room, his eyes moving across my face with an intensity that was almost clinical. I've been trying to understand it for weeks. The way you move, the way you respond, the way you're not her. No. I folded my hands on the table. I'm not. Then who? He stopped. Something moved through his expression. Anastasia Whitmore has been dead for 5 years. Reports of my death were arranged by people with very specific intentions. I held his gaze steadily. Sit down, Edward. There's no point in standing. He sat. Slowly, like a man whose legs had decided to stop consulting him. Where's Margaret? Safe. Somewhere you will never find her. She's my wife. She was a target you selected, isolated, and were in the process of defrauding. My voice was level. I have 4 years of documentation that establishes this in exhaustive detail. So does the SEC. So do the attorneys currently preparing a civil case on Margaret's behalf. Edward's jaw worked. You've destroyed everything. I've dismantled what you built fraudulently. There's a difference. I tilted my head slightly. Your father built something real. You replaced it with something that looked real from the outside and was hollow all the way through. I've done you a favor, actually. This way you don't have to spend the rest of your life maintaining the illusion. You think this is funny. I think it's over. I stood. The divorce will proceed. The civil suit will proceed. The SEC investigation will proceed. You have excellent lawyers, I'm sure they'll do what they can. But the documentation is thorough, the witnesses are credible, and the Whitmore family has resources you underestimated. He stared at me. I could tell them. I could go to the press right now and tell them that Margaret Ashford's identity was assumed by her sister for months. You could. I nodded. And the story that would follow would be about a man who was so fixated on controlling his wife that he couldn't tell when she had been replaced by someone else. That is not a story that helps you, Edward. The color left his face. I walked to the doorway and stopped. One more thing, I said. Evelyn Park has entered a cooperation agreement with the SEC and is providing documentation of your joint activities in exchange for reduced personal liability. I paused. I thought you should know what your partnership was actually worth when tested. I left him sitting alone in the dining room. Outside in the hallway, I exhaled slowly. It was done. 4 months later. The property Vincent had found was a farmhouse on 40 private acres, surrounded by old maple trees and the particular quiet of a place that had been holding its peace for a very long time. Margaret had been here for 4 months. In the first weeks, she had mostly slept. Then she had started walking the grounds in the mornings. Then she had called Jennifer, who had come to stay for 2 weeks and whose presence had clearly done more good than any formal program could have. When I arrived on a bright November morning, she was in the kitchen making coffee, moving with an ease that had been entirely absent when I'd held her in that Greenwich dressing room 4 months ago. She looked like herself. Not exactly the Margaret from before Edward. That woman had her own complications, her own things to work through, but something better than either version. Someone who had been through a dark room and come out the other side knowing exactly what her own face looked like. She heard my car and came to the door before I could knock. For a moment, we just looked at each other. "You cut your hair," I said. It fell just past her shoulders now, the dark waves framing her face. "I wanted to look different from you," she said. "For my own sanity." I laughed. She pulled me inside. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee and the November light coming through wide windows, and I told her everything. The board meeting. Raymond Holloway. The interim CEO appointment and the 18-month timeline. Edward's visit to the house. Evelyn's cooperation agreement. She listened without interrupting, the way she always had, absorbing everything, turning it over. "Is he going to face real consequences?" she asked when I finished. "Not just professional ones. The civil case is strong." "Margaret," I caught myself. "Your documentation was exceptional. The financial fraud case alone is substantial. The cooperation agreement means the SEC has someone on the inside. The criminal referral is likely." She nodded, looking at her coffee mug. "I'm not interested in watching him go to prison," she said slowly. "I just need to know that he can't do it to someone else. He can't. His credibility is gone, his assets are frozen, his network has collapsed. He has nothing to offer anyone." I paused. "Evelyn either. Her career in financial services is finished." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What about you? What about me? You went back. You spent months inside something dark and controlled and deliberate. That does something to a person, even when you're the one in control of it." She looked at me directly. "Are you all right?" I considered the question honestly. "I will be," I said. I went in knowing what I was walking into. It was a performance. "But you're right that it costs something. Come here for a while," she said. "Stay. There's a second bedroom and Jennifer is coming back next week," and she stopped. "Unless you have to go back. Unless the syndicate needs you. The syndicate has managed without me for 2 years. It can manage a little longer." Outside, the maple trees were bare and silver against a bright sky. Inside, the kitchen was warm and smelled like coffee and something Margaret had been baking earlier. I looked at my sister, my mirror, my opposite, the other half of whatever I was, and felt something uncurl in my chest. Not triumph. Something quieter and considerably more valuable than that. "All right," I said. "I'll stay." Margaret smiled. The real one. The one I'd been waiting 4 months to see. "Good." She pushed herself up from the table. "Then you can help me figure out what I actually want to do with Whitmore Industries. Because I've been thinking about it for months, and I have some ideas that are going to surprise you." I raised an eyebrow. "Try me," I said. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was genuinely curious about what came next. And that, beautiful people, is the story of Anastasia Whitmore, the woman who walked away from everything, came back for the one person who mattered, and dismantled a predator's empire piece by piece without ever breaking a single rule she didn't intend to break. If you love this story, please subscribe to our channel right now. We are so close to 2,000 subscribers, and every single one of you brings us closer to this milestone. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Until next time, stay sharp, stay unbothered, and never underestimate a woman who has been quietly watching. Love you all. Bye.